All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to this week's episode of Ship GTM. We're stoked today because we have Aman on with us, and we got a pretty cool topic we're gonna go into today, which is basically like the automating of GTM marketing, sales, and how that's happening across startups all the way to the tech giants. Aman, do you want to just start off by just introducing yourself a little bit, what you're working on these days?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. So, name's Aman. Like Bridger said, founder and AI engineer. Currently working at Vercel, and I've got a few other side projects I've been working on. But a lot of my time is now spent automating GTM functions. I think kind of what we're seeing, especially with AI now, because it kind of broadens the aperture. I think you guys talked about this, like broadens the aperture of what you can do with software. And so what
Mm-hmm.
that means is a lot of traditionally like sales led motions, which are really personalized one-to-one type, becomes kind of more of a marketing motion. So like where you would create, say, like a webinar, and then that would go out to like thousands of people through like Facebook ads. Now you can kind of create a prompt that generates highly personalized emails, and then that goes off to like thousands of folks. So that's kind of what I've been working on, and hopefully we can share kind of some of the more tangible projects that we've been building internally at Vercel, and some of the stuff I've been doing with side projects.
I think like what you said is interesting, where like GTM is kind of merging with marketing, where it is like that's honestly why I love like the term go to market in general, because for a long time we've separated marketing and sales into two different buckets when like it's so easy, like they were made for each other, so it's like I do feel like it's made it one like a ton easier with AR to kind of combine them and turn like the analytical side of marketing meets the personnel side of sales, and you can kind of combine them and scale that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too. How do you feel like emails is the main spot that's kind of it's turning the marketing function into a sales function, or vice versa? Or do you feel like there's like other spots that are kind of happening across orgs with AI?
Yeah, mostly I've seen it being done in emails. Like emails still work. I think like you just have to have like people's senses for like what is a good email is kind of the tolerance is like increasing over time. Like since the 90s when email really started, it was just like everyone's responding to every email. And then like progressively like that system gets more and more gamed. And so even now with AI, like really realistically, like what's the difference between having like 1,000 people in a call center or an email center blasting emails versus one person doing it with AI? It just means there's like more of the same. And so I think like
Mm-hmm.
still like it comes down to like having an appreciation for like the craft of outbounding messages, and like good taste for like what makes for a good compelling email, and then being realistic with like not spamming like a ton of people. But like what we've seen is with having a lot of success with really like tightening the scope almost, so like you're not really like outbounding to like tens of thousands of people in a list, but it's like super targeted 200 lists of people or 300 lists of people, and then
Mm-hmm.
working those leads in a way that is really personable, but like because it's so targeted it feels like super relevant and personalized. So like tangible examples, like at larger companies, and maybe if you're a startup or you're doing this also, like you've got a lot of different campaigns running. So you're running like webinars, maybe there's like a few variants, you're running a Facebook ad campaign over there, you've got events over here, like physical events that you're doing, and you're just like hoovering up leads. And so like very quickly you
Mm-hmm.
run into this problem where you actually have too much lead information to like process. And so you develop like a sixth sense for like, okay, if it's a non-personal email to like a website, like a company website, it's like maybe a brand that's in like something that I recognize, like it's in a list that I feel like might be worthwhile to pursue. You're gonna go and pursue it in like a personalized sales motion.
Mm-hmm.
But with AI is like I can work all of those leads simultaneously, and because they're super personalized, like AI can pick up context like what event that list came from, what type of person that individual is, and if I do have like a company name, I can grab some research, and I can create a really tight, like 3-line email with multiple follow ups and then reach out to that person. So, in their perspective, when they're seeing that email, it's just like super targeted, super relevant. And Opus 4.5 does a really good job making like good emails. So, like, that's what I mean, where like it really changes the
Mm-hmm.
game. Like, you can't just like blast 10,000 emails at once, but those kind of like principles of like really targeted lists, plus the AIs that are so good today, like changes the game. Like it's essentially no different than writing it from hand.
That's interesting. Do you feel like, I like what you said about keeping it concise? Because have you noticed this? Like, I'm sure everyone's gotten them now, these targeted AI emails or LinkedIn messages where they're almost like too personalized. Excuse me. And they're like, they just like pull back something that's like super niche in like your LinkedIn history or like your maybe like about your company. And you're like no reasonable person would do that much research on one lead. Do you feel like what have you done? What have you seen that helps like mitigate that? Like the over personalization, almost to the point where it's like, I mean, I think everyone realizes and accepts that like this is the new age we live in. Like we're going to be using AI for outbound, and if you're not, then you're going to get left behind. But like, how do we do it in a tasteful way? I guess.
I think that was kind of maybe the fallacy that I've had. So like in some of like the outreach campaigns I ran, like we don't really need to, like the fact that I know, you know, what company you work at, what level you're at, maybe some current initiatives that your business is doing. Like that is super personalized already. Like I don't necessarily need to go and like find some like niche post, like it, comment it to like kind of do this surface level stuff.
Yeah.
Like for most people, like their work is like pretty like tied to kind of like, you know, their livelihoods, how they derive value. So if you have all that context, like just learn more about their business and learn like what their day job might be, like what their pains might be and struggles might be, which you should if you're like, you know, launching a product or service or business or something. Like that's why you're in business, is you're servicing these people. And so I think that alone is like a really high level of personalization. And then you layer in that like, hey, I saw you like signed up for a webinar that we hosted. Like now you're even more personalized. And so like really the writing of the copy is like the easy part. The only difference is with AI is that we can just do it at a much larger scale. So like if we're like in the pre-AI world, we're like squeezing an orange, but like, you know, maybe have like, you know, 10% of the orange is juiced. Well, today we can do 100% of it and book like way more meetings because we're still like super personalized and dialed in. So yeah, I think maybe it's just like a fallacy, you know, like reading like what real personalization means. And also like we've spoken to this before, but like there's just a lot of like cruft and garbage and slop that's like on the internet anyway.
And it always existed.
So yeah, like, you know, like it's really no different, you know, like the people who write good emails that are super personalized, you know, they're going to win regardless of what the tooling is.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that like, that's a good point. I think that's like a principle you could take away. It's like a fallacy that like you can't write good personalized emails with AI that like sound like human-like. I think that the other part is like taste. Like you said, you know, like good taste is just saying like, hey, I saw that you signed up for this event, like, and you work at this company, like, cool, I think this ties in. Bad taste is like, well, like one I got the other day was like, hey, I saw that you like went to Georgia Tech and you have like I'm sure you took some classes on AI and like here's this AI product, like you might be interested. I'm like, dude, what? Like this is just weird. Like it's just like, I mean, obviously that information's out there, but it's just strange that anyone would like pull that up. It feels like too personal and just not tasteful, I guess. So yeah, I think that's great. That's like a good takeaway.
Yeah, I think too, like what you said that is a key is when the LLMs all came out and marketers got their hands on it, which is probably just right behind coders, you know, it's like they saw it as like, here's a way I can send 10,000 emails in a day versus like 20 or 100 or whatever my campaign was before. And so it became like the way to win this is to send 10,000 emails, have a 0.2% like conversion rate. And it's like, as long as I just scale my emails, I'm going to be okay, you know? Whereas like, I love what you're saying, which is kind of like flips that on its head, where it's like the people who were winning before and like I had a like solid sales team were sending emails that like impacted the person they sent them to and like helped them to open it. And so it's like, can you build the agent to do that? And like where we're at with Opus, where we're at with search tools, where we're at with like data collection, like we can today. And like I like that you're talking in like 200, 300 numbers in like a campaign versus, you know, like what I feel like I've heard on the flip side when I'm pitched something like this, like even like, you know, the LinkedIn DMs that are like, we can get you we'll send 10,000 emails on your behalf a day and you can get 50 leads a day, you know, whatever. Whereas like, I love this concept because it's like targeted, it's personal. And so I'd love to hear too, like how you are approaching that and like maybe where you've seen the most success, like at Vercel, and then maybe too about your startup too.
I'll say like holistically, like that's the exact approach we took, which is we recognize that like as like a company, we have a lot of activity that's done on the marketing side. But like we said, like the problem is like the sales team has kind of like a sixth sense for what is a good account for each of these events, right? So whether like, you know, AWS reInvent just happened, we've got a huge lead list there. Same concept. Like we know like kind of instinctually like what's going to be a good account to go after. And so we go after those accounts. And then, you know, there's like a new event that comes up. And the same thing, like time is limited. Why bother working like the 80%, you know, long tail of leads when there's another event with another set of like 20% really high quality leads to go after? And so what we've done is like we've took that 80% that was usually just untouched and kind of just like withering in the CRM, and we put it through this new kind of follow-up agent that we have. And so if I can speak on that for a little bit, essentially it's two parts. Number one, you get the list. The list goes into an agent that scores that marketing qualified lead. So that's called like our MQL score. And essentially you can think of it as the same thing. It's just going to get the contact information, understand the company, try to do some research, and then come up with a heuristic of whether or not we should like reach out to it or not. Because even in that list, you know, there could be some like, you know, students or something else that we don't necessarily want to reach out to. So that's step one. And then step two is now we have on the other end, we've got this now filtered list of leads. And so what we're doing is kind of the same thing. We're just doing, like I said, using all this contextual information of the event they went to, the company that they're at, maybe their role, and the tools we use there are mostly Exa. Exa has like a really good people searching tool now, as well as like kind of company keyword search. So we put all that information together along with these sales generated prompts. So the sales team is actually, the leadership is generating these prompts themselves, seeing the copy, refining it. And we just take that massive list of now scored leads, throw them all into this follow-up agent, do the research, generate the emails. It's a 3-email sequence, and then gets sequenced out over to Outreach. And what's really awesome about this is that, and you know, Cam and I, we've worked on a few projects where like this has been like the game changer. Nobody has to change tools. Like the sales development team, they just go to the tool they've always been using, which is Outreach. And the only difference now is instead of like working leads, there's just emails ready for them to send. And that's the magic. Because now they just go in daily and say, like, oh, I've got like 10 emails here. Great, send all, looks great. And then like they book meetings and they, you know, get quota attainment. Like that's the dream.
Yeah.
They don't have to go to a new tool or a new dashboard or anything. And like that whole step of friction is just gone.
Yeah, I think it's like kind of the crux of what I feel like Aman and I work on a lot at Vercel on the go-to-market engineering side is like this idea of, Aman mentioned it, like why work on those like 80% like long tail leads or whatever if like you have like 20% that you should really focus on. I think historically, like, you know, SDRs or sales leaders like had to focus on those because it was like the highest value potential. But then now, like with all of this work and automation and, you know, building agents, we can now basically, it's like gold panning, right? Like instead of going after the nuggets, we can now pan for gold, and like over time that adds up to like a lot of value. And then like we're letting agents do the panning, and then we're letting like SDRs work on like, you know, finding the golden nuggets. And so it's like we'll do all the hard, you know, gritty whatever work with agents because it's like we can just kick off a ton of them to do all this work. And the SDRs can now just focus on these like high value tasks in Outreach, right? To like actually interface, which is super cool. And I feel like it's like, yeah, and sticking to the tools that people know is massive, and just like basically meeting people where they're at. And I think like that's a larger, this is probably like a discussion for another time, but like a larger scale trend that we've seen in software recently and like B2B SaaS is like kind of that idea. I mean, Cursor is one, right? Like Cursor forked VS Code because people were working in VS Code, or like a lot of these like legal platforms, and like Aman, you know, what Aman's working on the side with his startup, basically meeting lawyers where they're at and tools that they're familiar with. And I think this is like the future of software. just kind of tacking on AI assistants to like where people are already working.
Yeah, I think one, like, Cloud Code as well, you know, like,
yeah,
developer tools, if they sit in the CLI, that's like, it's just so much more ergonomic. I'm already familiar with the tool. And a lot of developers have their whole, like, you know, system is riced out with like, you know, ZSH and like bash profiles. And so it just like fits really nice and easy into it. Or like, with VS Code and Cursor. And a lot of, I mean, there's companies in the legal space, like I think it's CCC Macros. And like they've been around for like 20 years and they're just, the software costs $8,000 a year. Like they're just printing money. And the reason why it's so sticky is like it's such a good tool, and it's literally just a Word extension, a Microsoft Word extension. And it's just like the lawyers don't have to like, this is their IDE, Microsoft Word. It sits right in there. They're familiar with it. They like to use it. It's not a new UI that they have to learn. And so like, you know, if you're building these tools, you know, especially for like GTM and marketing folks who are maybe a little bit less technically savvy, like obviously like nobody will hop on new software faster than GTM folks because they're always looking for alpha wherever they can get it. But if you can meet them where they're at, whether it's like a Slack bot or it's an outreach or it's in a tool that they're familiar with, it's just going to increase adoption rate. You know, and that's always great because then they're like using technology in a way that's like, you know, helpful for their job. The other part is like, if it's in something that they're familiar with, most likely if they're working in like a larger org, they've got a lot of data attribution and instrumentation built on top of that. So like at Vercel, we've got a lot of systems built on top of Outreach. And Outreach has a lot of stats on how, let's say, certain sequences are performing, right? So like we have Salesforce campaigns, and those are matched to Outreach campaigns, and now we're able to like pull the data through everything. And so it's not only that we're like automatically creating emails for SDRs to send off, but we also have this whole attribution system that just plugs right in. Now leadership can see like how our campaigns performing. And then us as builders, we have like a lot of good feedback that like the work we're doing is actually usable and valuable for the team.
Yeah, totally. And all that infrastructure set up for attribution is like, I think some people would maybe call it like, oh, tech debt, right? Like if you try to switch platforms, then it's like you have all this debt associated with it. I think it's the opposite though. It's like, you know, Outreach is objectively like a good platform for email outreach, right? I mean, I have my own opinions about its UI and little things like that, but like overall, like it's a good platform and it's kind of like the standard. And so like we just kind of tack into it. One thing I think that we can talk about too that's interesting is like this idea that all these systems exist, and then like how do we build up like the knowledge that's required to be able to enable these agents to take action. That's something that we're working on as well at Vercel, and I think it's like an issue that everyone's kind of trying to work on right now, is like building up this knowledge base, and then how can that like power agents. But it's been kind of interesting like to see like the progression of like agent memory and agent context from like initially it was like RAG, right? Like RAG was the best way to be able to like give context to an agent now, and then it kind of switched over to like you should just give like as much context as possible, and like Gemini models, you know, like extended the context window to like 1 million tokens, which is just like nuts. And so then it's like, okay, well maybe we don't even need RAG anymore, like RAG is dead. And then like now we're like rebuilding from first principles agents with like core computing principles, like just using a file system, using bash tools, things like that. And I think that's great, but also like we're trying to find this like middle ground where it's like maybe we do reach for something like you know, a vector database with some things, and then maybe we just reach for like pure files in another way. But even just like the non-technical work of like aggregating all that information and having it in a spot where everyone can access it, and then especially agents can access it, I feel like has been really critical for our work, because then you know, if a person is having a hard time finding something or has to do click ops to go to all these different places to find it, then like an agent's going to also have a really hard time. So like where can we leverage existing tools where possible, but then also build up this knowledge base to be able to like give access to different agents? Still a work in progress, but I feel like it's definitely like I think it's the future of work, of like knowledge work, because there's just all this alpha that's just sitting, you know, in Slack channels and Notion documents and Word documents that we need to like get all together.
So I had a LinkedIn post about this. I think it's increase. I mean, one thing that I've done personally is like I love like note-taking systems. And so I've like gone through this evolution of like I had everything in Notion, and then I stopped that, and then I moved everything to Obsidian. I stopped that because I was like, I'm not tagging things, I'm just like creating files. And so like before the AI stuff, I just had all my notes in like a various like folders of like Markdown essentially. And what's been very serendipitous is that now with Claude Code, like I can just ask it things about my knowledge base, and it just like prints out all the information. It's got all the context it needs, and everything's like organized or like in these like large files. So if I had a meeting with somebody, I have it in my meeting notes file. So then I can just go in and just like grab that person's name, find the line numbers, and like pull out the context individually that it needs. And it's smart enough with its tool calls to like understand that. And so like I've been thinking more and more of like how can I like file system max my systems. And so like for example, Vercel is a very Slack heavy culture. And so I'm thinking of ways like, okay, how can I all these notifications that I'm getting, can I create like text files and just like have an append log? And then I can just like, review that, have AI review, like, hey, these are some priority conversations you should look into. That's one thing. The other thing that we started doing is like in our code base, and I started doing this everywhere for my side projects and for the work at Vercel, is we just heavily index on like the monorepo concept. And we're just like, dumping context into just doc files. And I feel like this kind of solved that long time perennial problem of developers don't write documentation. It's problem solved because like I just like my new flow is I'll write a tech spec. So like my idea is like I'm basically creating a prompt for Claude to just one shot a feature. So I'll like do all these iterations on the tech spec. I'll get it to a good spot, and then I'll just say, hey Claude, go ahead and run through this like tech spec and finish it up. And then in the tech spec I'll have like a dev log. So anyone that's coming up in the future to looking at like what did I work on, what is this particular feature, like the context, just looks at the tech spec that's there.
Yeah.
Our coworker Vieko has this cool bonfire system. Same thing. Just little scripts, little tools to just save the context in text. And then now it's in text, it's in a file system. Claude at any point can just go reach in and grab the context and do something with it.
Yeah. I think it's like I like what you said too about using markdown files just as because I think like a lot of these principles, people from the outside looking in, especially in the GTM, like from a GTM lens, is people might think like, oh, these are like systems that developers utilize, and like I don't think I can utilize it for myself. But I feel like we've started to see that shift, like whether it's just taking markdown files or people like really leveraging tools like Granola for like their personal notes, and then just having it all in one place where they can search and index it. But it's like it's massive, right? And then I think like that's the first step, is to be able to figure out like your second brain yourself for like where you have all this. And then if you can just have it in a format that you can pass off to an agent like Claude Code or, open code, like whatever, even just like a LLM, that's huge to be able to like work faster.
Yeah. As far as like managing context for apps, I feel like that's still more of an open question for me. My like side projects are kind of a graveyard of different like implementation strategies here. So I've got like, so in the legal space, for example, your average case, right, your average matter is going to have maybe 600 legal docs, everything from like court forms to like correspondence, email correspondence, phone transcripts, to like medical health records, like a bunch of different types of data. And so obviously the problem is like how to manage all these. And like, so for some documents, like say if you're beginning litigation, you want to file what's called a complaint pleading. The complaint pleading needs to generate like a factual narrative of like the details of the case, right? Like what happened chronologically, where did the offense occur, right? What are the laws that were broken? And so that's going to need like a particular set of documents. So like, I don't really care about like the retainer agreement that I signed with my client. I want the chronology. I want the like emails that the person's boss had sent that had like, incriminating like discrimination case or something. And so what I started doing now is kind of like a combination of all of them. I have RAG systems to like get some context, high level. I also have this system now where I'm doing more prescriptive file name checks. So I'll first look at all the file names and then try to basically have the LLM generate keywords and then do kind of like a fuzzy string matching. So there's no like RAG or anything. It's just straight up string matching. And then once I have that list of files, I go in the files and I pull out RAG. So it's just kind of like multiple forms of systems and programmatic calls in order to get, I think, like the final context.
Yeah.
Not a solved problem by any means, but like this system seems to be working pretty well, at least in my case.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. One approach that I've seen that I've kind of started diving into, and it's for, some internal things, and then also just like in general as interest, is like this hierarchical analysis. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but like you create like this hierarchy of information, and so it works especially well with like qualitative data. It could maybe work for like documents, but if you have like a call transcript, for instance, like having the call transcript as like raw data, text markdown, and then basically like having an asset from that, so like a derived maybe summary, and then from that summary also, and the original also, like then breaking that up into like specific points, and then being able to tie all these things back together, whether you embed it or just hold it as raw text, to be able to say like, because then you could do almost like clustering across it, where you can say like, I want to know where all of the instances that talk about X, and you can easily go like cross document, pull all those things in, and then tie it back to the document. I think that's a really good approach. Bridger, I'd be curious too, because I know that you've been working on something similar with documents and like creating like chronologies and stuff. Maybe some of like the context tips that you've come across.
Yeah. Like I think you are, when you run into like the million context window, like it's exciting because you think you can just shove everything into a context window, right? And that it will just magically work. But in reality, just like humans, the more context you have, the harder it is to be accurate and to pick the right thing out. And so I've been doing, I would say, like really similar to what you guys are talking about, which is like this like file system concept. And like there's even like DeepMind has been coming out with like more information about like these like recursive language models rather than like a large language model, which basically you pass in context, which gets indexed into like a Python pipeline that then it can access and like use tools to search up things. And like it's just been really interesting to like give it that setup where like I build, like I'm also working with like huge documents like Aman is talking about, where it's like just insane, like 4,000 pages, where it's like no, it's like just insane for a human to go through. So it's like same thing for an AI. So by splitting it into chunks and giving like like the control F access to like the AI, like you're able to ask questions and then it can search basically on its own terms and use kind of like its abilities to find the exact answer versus just hoping like a one shot would work. And so I do think like this whole concept will be even like implemented more into like the LLMs, and like how that's going to work. That's above my pay grade. But like I do feel like this is where we're all going. It seems like I feel like RAG was cool, vector databases were cool, still are cool, right? But it's like this gives you like the accuracy while managing context, and it actually makes it like way cheaper because you're not passing in 800,000 tokens every prompt. Like you're just grabbing what you need, so it's really interesting.
Yeah. Like you said, I was reading this, I think Anthropic published it, like a thing around context engineering. And then there was a really good talk around, I think it's context engineering. Mitchell, do you remember that? Mitchell shared it with us, Bridger. We'll have to have Mitchell maybe on sometime to talk to, but he sent it, and it was like an AI summit. It was like the AI engineering summit, a talk. We can drop like a link in the description, but it was really interesting because it talked about how like a lot of research says around 70% of the context limit, like once the agent hits like 70% of its context limit, that's when it really starts to kind of like lose track of what's going on. So like, how do we keep things at that sweet spot, right? Like, and I think that like you're saying, it's good to just basically like find ways to parse the right information to put it in. And I think like that seems like a good approach, rather than, I think RAG and like, embeddings still have like a very compelling case for them, but then also like, it seems like a good hedge against the bitter lesson is just letting the LLM just do what it feels like it needs to find the information, rather than trying to like invent some Frankenstein memory system. So who knows? Time will tell. I mean, Opus 4.5 has like changed everything. I feel like, maybe Opus 5 will be like mind bending. Yeah. We won't need anything anymore.
Yeah, the thing that I've been really struggling with is I feel like I'm just not getting it, or maybe I'm just using the wrong tools. But kind of the reason why I've been stepping away a little bit from like kind of specifically like the bash style file system navigations is that I just was never quite able to get tool calls to work. I know like we were talking about this a lot.
Yeah.
I feel like maybe it's because it adds context that I'm not familiar. I'm not exactly sure like how the context is being added for like what tools are available to the LLM. And also, I do believe that it's like, and I think Cam, you might have mentioned it. Like Anthropic is really good at tool calls, but if you're trying to maintain like AI model interoperability, that the other models are not quite as good at calling the tools. And so, what I might like, I started exploring this today with my side project is instead of having it like be an explicit tool call and like say if you're using the AI SDK, like they have like this tools section you can just drop in the functions. Instead of doing that, basically just do like a separate LLM call that's kind of like the tool call decider. And so in that, I put like the context of all the things that are available. And so, for example, like I have this flow where to create a legal document, the first step takes a lot of work. And so we take the request, we pull in citations, we generate steps, and then we have this like massive 30-page document that's just created. But then every subsequent request basically does like a Claude style document update. So it has like a much like smaller scope to find and replace. And so now you want some like judgment. If a request comes in for an update and it needs to grab citations, like it's a pretty substantial like chunk of the document it's going to replace, I need to grab citations. If not, if it's just like, hey, remove like, 5 bullet points from this thing here, I don't need to grab citations. And so what I started experimenting with is like having a separate LLM call that just has that decision factor of like grab citations or not, like fetch in more context or not, ask the user for like reprompt for more context or not. And so we'll see how this experiment lands. But yeah, I mean, I think that just goes to show like how early all this is. Like we're not really nothing's like set in stone at all. Like there's no Next.js of it.
Yeah, and I think you'll have to update us in a bit on like how it goes, because I think that like that's another thing I've been reading about is this idea of like kicking off things to subagents, and I think that's like a good approach, because instead of muddying the main context window of like the document generation or whatever, it's like kick off a subagent, basically just another LLM call, and then like have it do a task, come back with like a very, very like 4-sentence summary of like what happened, what like where the information is that it needs, give it to the main agent, and then it's like, okay, you don't have to muddy the context window with all of this unnecessary tokens of, especially like these LLMs that are like, there's probably like the tinfoil hat like theory that like a lot of them love tokens because it like costs more money and then they're making more money. But like, I feel like they do really like tokens. And so like mitigating that to just not muddy the context window, I feel like is also a strategy in itself.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. I feel like it's interesting because like tool calls are so like great, but then also like it's adding this deterministic process into like a thing that's like innately stochastic. So it's just like tough because it doesn't always act the way you want it to, which is hard. Like, so it's like just doing like a step function, like always run this first. That's almost seems like the best approach for a lot of things, right? It's just a workflow instead of maybe like a true agent.
Yeah, that's I think what it is like, and I do give Vercel a lot of credit for like building out these like workflows like that.
Yeah,
the workflows, and it's such a game changer because it literally is like most of these things are just workflows. I mean, for the thing that we've been building at Vercel, that's literally it. Actually, is like we have this one step where we kind of it's one endpoint that we're shoving all this like kind of list data into. So you can imagine there's like lots of different campaigns coming in, and sometimes like we'll want to change the campaign name. Like we make some adjustments, so it's never quite one-to-one. Like maybe it starts off as a one-to-one, but then over time reinvent becomes reinvent 2025. Right, so like stuff like that, like little mutations happen over time. And so as far as like this concept in practice, I do have that running. So it tries to do an exact match on the campaign or to bucket it into the correct like system prompts. But then if it fails, if it doesn't match on anything, then we go into this kind of specific subagent LLM call that looks at all of our campaigns that are in the database, and it looks at what the incoming campaign is, and then it makes the decision, and it has a confidence value. So it's like decision and plus confidence value. Then we make the call to like proceed or not, or to like error out, and then we can just report that, handle that later. So that's been working really well internally, and that's why I kind of have a little bit more confidence here, especially because we're dealing with like pretty sensitive stuff. We're like generating like tons of email copy, and it's like a lot of it's like we want to make sure that the email is getting bucketed correctly. I just don't have enough confidence in like tool calls yet to like pass it off.
Yeah, it seems a little bit too risky.
Yeah. Which
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I'm just like, I'm like architecting this stuff wrong. I just have no way to tell. But just in the tests that I have ran, it just hasn't been super fruitful. And I know I think one of the massive advantages of building these, why do I index on like AI model interoperability, is because sometimes Anthropic's not going to be the best, say, email writer, and I want to be very able to like quickly to be able to swap that out to whatever's latest and greatest.
Definitely.
So that's why I'm kind of indexing on that for now.
Yeah. And then I think like there's a whole different discussion that we can always have on like evals too, and like how do we set up a strict set of tests basically to like make sure to see which one is the right. And I think that like interoperability is huge for that too, right? Because like you kind of have to build your system and test your system in a way that you can test across different models. Something that I feel like not maybe a lot of orgs are like the best at, but it's like, it's changing so fast it's almost hard to like keep up with that. But it's also a really good approach. Yeah.
Sweet.
Well, sweet. This was great. Yeah, I think let's see if we were to summarize. Obviously, there's massive value in automating these processes with AI, and I think a big fallacy is that it can't be done tastefully, effectively, but it definitely can. I feel like we're proof of that, like what we're doing at Vercel, and then what we see a lot of other startups doing as well. It's exciting times.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I'd say like my big takeaway I'd say I learned from Aman is like the importance of like building the system for quality, right? I think like it's easy to build it for quantity with AI, especially because you're like, I can just run this all day and do it, I think that is important. It's like use it to boost your quality work that you're doing, not to like hinder it or change it, right? And so, yeah, Aman, really appreciate having you on, man. This has been awesome. What's the best place for people to follow you? X?
Yeah, actually, I'd say at LinkedIn because they're just giving out impressions over there. So
sweet, yeah.
They really are.
LinkedIn, Aman Azad. I post pretty regularly.
Yeah, I'll drop his URL below too. But awesome. Well, thanks for watching this week's episode, and we'll see you next time.